Hello there, Fools of April. It's everyone, and welcome back to Plus Ultraman. For our next Gag Multiverse special, we're exploring a timeline that might not be as dark as you'd think, though it's probably still pretty doomed. What if Frieza and Cooler were born as a single fused being? Meet Coolieza. Of course, another pretty classic EX fusion from the Dragon Ball Fusions game, in which the biggest joke of all is that we somehow haven't gotten any sequels yet. Just concepts for a video game and a bit of whatevery. Frieza and Cooler are obviously fairly different and distinct characters, despite being meant to be similar, both in terms and lore as siblings, and also because Cooler pretty much represents Frieza, or the events and stakes in the story he held in the DBZ movie continuity universe. Frieza obviously existed in that universe, but to a certain extent, he and Cooler are supposed to be interchangeable. They are meant to be compared and contrasted as two very different sides of the same coin, which is also why later on in the canon series, as we get into Super and stuff, as he matures and grows, we begin to see a more self-assured and confident Frieza who acts a tad more like his movie canon brother. So it does kind of make the question of combining them into truly one character both terrifying yet not exactly as foolish as one might think, as I'd argue if approached correctly, a true full story for this concept could end up quite compelling and creative. For example of the differences in Frieza and Cooler, and how combining them could be a lot more interesting than just the bad guy winning a lot through pure strength. Think of it this way, when Frieza gets bad news, at least at the point in his journey and maturity he was at by the point of Nameksok, he is liable to kill the messenger for delivering that bad news, even when the underling in question has nothing to do with what upset him, because everyone at that point is either disposable or only useful for his own whims, while Cooler simply doesn't keep underlings around him who he feels are disposable enough that he will be willing to kill one just because he got upset. He wasn't as pampered as Frieza and did not have as much means, and that kind of instilled in him a value to his own troops that Frieza seemed to lack. It's not to say that Cooler wouldn't kill one of his troops if they got him mad, or that Frieza didn't have soldiers that he valued, but the ways and rates at which they reached those conclusions were different. Really put into perspective, where Frieza prefers to throw soldiers at a situation until it's handled, regardless of how much of a meat grinder it may be, Cooler operates the armored squadron as its commander-in-chief, acting more as a high-ranking military officer on the ground who actually fights alongside the troops, rather than the emperor who stays safe light years away from the conflict. It's likely why Cooler was able to evolve beyond Frieza, as it is kinda crazy to think of, but back in the day before Super, when Omega Shenron was the biggest, baddest character in the whole franchise, Cooler was the strongest representative of the Wicked Bloodline, and yet at a lot of points he seemed to carry that power a lot better and a little more humbly than even Frieza could, at least if he wasn't needing to show that power to either Frieza or the Super Saiyan he'd been hearing about his whole life. In fact, when his hand-picked soldiers are overwhelmed, Cooler is actually practical and preemptive, almost angry, taking immediate steps to save or at least preserve Saul's life after Piccolo proved strong enough to be a lethal threat to his men, while Frieza originally only got angry that his underlings failed in general, where Frieza's motivations for the Dragon Balls and selfish vengeance ultimately lost him everything and got him killed. Cooler is arguably a lot more selfless, and in his own twisted and special way, loyal to his family, his empire, and its honor, as the last representative of the strongest clan of the universe. And in those few comparisons alone, you can see it. Cooler is the nuance that Frieza wouldn't gain until the era of Super. You already have a somewhat profound difference for the two siblings of the Wicked Bloodline to explore this story with, that should keep us from just saying the most evil villain possible gets an undeserved power-up and wreaks havoc on the series, winning every conflict and leaving no room for the heroes to make a comeback, as the timeline is just essentially fucked up. That's certainly a very fair and valid assessment to make, but very far from the most interesting to explore, as I feel like fusing the two shouldn't result in only the worst aspects being heightened as an ultra evil villain. As another name for this what if in fact could be what if Frieza grew up early? What if Frieza was more like Cooler? Or what if Frieza wasn't so evil, / what if Frieza was a good boss? Because in my opinion, if you fused Frieza and Cooler, you wouldn't get just a worse version of Frieza. You should instead get a more balanced, efficient, and terrifyingly competent emperor, someone closer to Beerus than Boo, for example, since I think the most disturbing thing about Coolieza as a being with so much unreasonable strength would be that he is in fact so reasonable, since whether you add or multiply Frieza's power on top of Cooler's power, the result is a pretty insane number for most points in the Dragon Ball timeline that aren't fairly late game, as in probably need to be a good portion past the point of the Cell Saga and likely even the Majin Buu Saga. And what's way more terrifying to think about is the potential to grow stronger that Coolieza will be in possession of, considering Frieza is already well known in the modern era for his ability to grow incredibly strong with only a minor investment in training, and thus we could reasonably assume that Cooler would also have an abnormally high rate of power gain, even if not the same as Frieza's being a mutant and all. And beyond even this, by the nature of fused fighters in Dragon Ball, they should always have higher hidden potentials than the sum of their parts, since by definition, after a fusion is formed or born into the world, they have not actually trained or prepared to use their power beforehand. So if they did, the results could be dramatically amplified, compared to what kind of gains the parts of the fusion may have achieved. In conclusion, obviously no matter how it is approached, the strength and latent ability of any fusion, especially one involving Frieza of all people, can't be sneezed at. So instead of King Cold producing 2 separate children, and whatever reproduction process you personally prefer for the Frieza race or Frost Demons or whatever you may like to call them, be it lying dormant in incubation for long periods of time beneath large bodies of ice, or whatever else, a single child is born in this timeline, one who possesses extremely strong mutations to the traits and features of the Wicked Bloodline, which would give King Cold an even greater confidence in this newborn Coolieza than he would ever place in either Frieza or Cooler combined in canon, since this fused heir grows up without Frieza's deep-seated insecurities or Cooler's chip on his shoulder, with this likely affecting how the Cold Monarch would then raise the heir to the Empire at first, since with no sibling to compete with for attention and recognition, Coolieza and Cold could also just have a better relationship, coming to some kind of understanding that everything the light in this universe touches may as well belong to the little future monarch, and thus, he would not have such a need to feel petulantly superior about everything, as that concept will be proven self-evidently by his mere existence and undeniable power, so that when Coolieza is warned to know his place and show respect to exactly 4 of the beings in the universe, the God of Destruction, their angel, Majin Buu, and something called the legendary Super Saiyan, the young Frost Demon heeds his father's words curiously, without a sense of Frieza's hasty fearfulness or Cooler's blind overconfidence, because he is more tempered, patient, and strategic by multitudes, more than either of the villains we will be so used to from the canon and movies. However, just as tempered would be Coolieza's reaction to the Saiyans themselves, as also unlike Frieza, he would have his hasty ambitions to be rid of them reined in by part of his secretly fused nature, allowing the Cooler side to reject a course of action that could ultimately weaken the Empire, since this always seemed to be the one line he is unwilling to cross, and thus the loss of the Saiyans is an outcome that will be unacceptable for the secretly fused monarch, since he would have aspects of both Frieza's being a prodigy and Cooler a natural-born military officer. Here, instead of deciding that if the Super Saiyan legend is to be respected and true, then he will simply show the entirety of the Saiyans that deserved respect, and it probably would be genuine, as strong as he is, it would be undeniably admirable that a Saiyan was even able to injure someone who is related to Coolieza, especially since they aren't lauded as a god, angel, or Jinn of chaos. So rather than fearing what their growing strength can eventually lead to like Frieza, or staying quiet and doing nothing while they are mistreated and thrown away for petty reasons like Cooler, Coolieza makes it a goal to secure an even stronger alliance with the Saiyans, a partnership with the intention of growing powerful enough to never be threatened by the likes of the other 3 great powers of the universe. In fact, the first time Coolieza meets the Saiyans would likely be very different to the first time Frieza did, with Coolieza being less overtly showboaty and more interested in the Saiyans as a whole, as he not only knows he can't be hurt, but after using the scouters to learn how strong the species is, he is also fairly certain at the rate they are growing, they wouldn't even be able to for a long while, despite how much they may want to. Therefore, it's more useful to immediately encourage more positive relations with the warrior race, seeing Coolieza instead of killing Saiyan snipers, or sending the Uzara transforming fighters on assignments that will surely end in loss of casualties. The fused Frost Demon ruler begins to train the Saiyan race himself, even picking out noteworthy individuals to serve in his personal armored squadron forces, as super elites of the military, offering greater social mobility and means to receiving glory, or playing to the pride of the Saiyans as a whole, in the end, making them over time quite loyal to Coolieza, as his armored squadron would be, simply because for a cruel and greedy dictator, Coolieza would be arguably very reasonable, likely at a point in temperament and personality that mirrors closer to how Frieza is in modern day Super, after achieving the power of Black Frieza, more confident and self-assured, without as many doubts or weaknesses in the psyche and spirit that end horribly for their underlings. This would also likely cause a lot of familiar Saiyan faces to become high-ranking members of Coolieza's personal army, which could affect whether or not a character like Goku ends up sent off planet to escape a plot to eradicate the Saiyans, as there just wouldn't be one here. In fact, this version of Bardock could arguably be one of Coolieza's closest confidants, on the lines of what Salzar Captain Ginyu would represent to Frieza and Cooler, and the rule of Coolieza would only grow more benevolent and wide-ranging the greater the loyalty shown by the Saiyans became, with them in turn being rewarded with the deserved respect and glory, while also being allowed to spread out and conquer the stars, under the watchful and discerning eye of the new Emperor, as he has officially made progress on making one of his greatest possible allies out of one of his most dangerous foes, since Planet Vegeta is never destroyed, with Coolieza taking a strong stance that this policy and that the treatment of the Saiyans and his other subjects would not change, as he would instead seek to destroy any threat that could result in weakening the Empire's military might. Not to mention, this more sensible leader of the Empire would be more successful at furthering the planetary trade, both in terms of selling and conquering worlds, as his charisma would have also risen to match his fusion-born multiplied strength. This could then create a situation where the Heaters are also kept as much closer allies and valued members of the Coolieza Corps, making the military's power of information gathering just as formidable as their powers of persuasion and world conquest. While the likes of a fighter like Gas is also inducted into Coolieza's inner circle to keep Elect both in line and satisfied without a need for greater ambitions or rebellion on his family's part. Similarly, this extremely more reasonable and easy to negotiate with version of the Frieza/Cooler Empire would also be capable of finding some common ground with the likes of the Galactic Patrol, since they are both kind of spreading order and peace throughout the galaxy, resulting in a timeline where the two space organizations are not so opposed to one another, but instead able to achieve some form of diplomacy, or if worse comes to worse, Coolieza is certainly so much stronger and more persuading than Frieza or Cooler as to be able to likely take over and absorb the Patrol if they weren't willing to make compromises for the Empire. Thus, when Coolieza meets Beerus and Whis finally, I also have to imagine that the Frost Demon having access to Cooler's maturity and greater impulse control could likely make a far better impression on the cat deity than Frieza's refined etiquette alone would accomplish by itself in canon, and likely an even better impression on Whis, who would be able to sense Coolieza's immense potential and stable spirit for one so young in his position. However, that isn't to say this meeting will be completely peaceful, since Beerus' order to destroy Planet Vegeta would very obviously conflict with Coolieza's new policy, leading the Frost Demon to have to respectfully decline the request of a god, for better or worse. And equally as obviously, Beerus wouldn't like this, and would enforce his will with violence and destruction, with Coolieza ironically having to fight and prove the strength of his convictions as a leader on behalf of the Saiyan race, doing his best to impress the god of destruction in order to protect his extremely useful underlings. And since Coolieza would thankfully possess the insane durability of Frieza, stacked on top of the even more insane durability of Cooler, with a bit of extra thrown on top, he is just barely able to survive long enough to keep Lord Beerus entertained, as it is a very hard-fought quote-unquote battle. But even so, Coolieza holds his own and maintains his honor, despite it being the first time anyone has ever been able to overpower him, causing Beerus to actually lose interest in getting rid of the rude Saiyans, and instead taking a greater interest and respect for Coolieza, as he doesn't annoy him as much as Frieza's pettiness did, and instead appeals to the god as a fellow professional, simply doing his duty, even when he doesn't like it. Besides, if he were able to somehow get stronger, Beerus is certain that the young Frost Demon could be the most entertaining rival he could possibly dream of, stating offhandedly that he may even cut his upcoming nap a few centuries or so short, just so that he can face off with the Emperor again when he has grown more. As with this critical success, from the advantage on the charisma check that is the god of destruction, Coolieza would knock the second and third names off his enemies list, not by felling deities, but by successfully securing a mentor in both Beerus and Whis, which of course would inevitably lead to his being trained and prepared as a candidate to be the next god of destruction of Universe 7, and arguably he would make an excellent one, as like I said, the temperament he'd have would pretty much just be what Beerus is already, and with it, he would certainly have the strength and potential needed for it as well, not to mention a mind that, while reasonable, can most certainly be focused solely on destruction. Eventually, Coolieza recovers from the encounter with Beerus, gaining a greater deal of respect from all his subjects for his ironically heroic actions, as he is essentially now a version of Frost who just isn't lying, and is now learning what it means to truly train from Whis, who is quickly overjoyed and pleasantly surprised by how quickly the Frost Demon progresses and grows, while outside of the training, the Empire and Coolieza's wisdom grow in tandem. And because of this as a side effect, the training Coolieza personally gives to his armored squadron force would be extremely enhanced, enough as to prove the Super Saiyan legend true, when one of his men achieves it thanks to his training and pledges his mythical power to the Empire in exchange for a real fight against his lord. When the corrupt space billionaire Goichi tries to plan a coup by investing in a new form of enhanced artificial android soldiers, known as the OGs, he is thwarted by Coolieza simply employing a platoon of his elitely trained Cerealian artillery units, whom destroy Goichi's army from light years away before Coolieza can even arrive to the battlefield. When Majin Buu finally awakens from his long slumber, thanks to the machinations of a space-traveling wizard and the King of Demons, Coolieza is prepared, if not excited, to test the final of the beings he was warned to never cross, with his power now likely high enough that Buu is entertained, if not charmed into joining the Coolieza Corps himself, and just in time, as this recent discovery would now open up the Demon Realm as a brand new market of real estate for the Empire. When other gods of destruction interfere with Universe 7, Beerus and Whis are more than happy to let Coolieza and the Armored Squadron Force represent them and win it all in multiple inter-universal tournaments. When a deranged god from another timeline takes over his body, it actually represents a real challenge for once. That is, until the Emperor uses the power of Black Coolieza to overcome Coolieza Black, and as more Saiyans, ancient wizards, threats from the films, and even the legend of the Dragon Balls and Namekians face off with Coolieza, they all eventually bow to him, not just because he is the strongest, but because in the end, he is the most capable leader and ruler the universe has ever known, with the title of God of Destruction eventually falling to him, and opening the rest of the universes up to fall in line as well. But that's where we'll be ending this story, and thank Kami, because even under the most optimistic lens, that one still got very dark very quick. Happy April Fools, and I'll catch you guys next time.